Mr. and Mrs. Clinton had been married for over 30 years without a child. They had tried several doctors and traditional herbalists, all to no avail. They had even visited various prayer houses and mountains with the hope of conceiving a child. At the time, they visited a prayer house in which the prophet asked them to pay an exorbitant amount of money, telling them that through that amount, he would woo God to open the heavens and bless them with a kid, which they struggled to pay. Still, their situation remained the same. Obviously, the so-called man of God was a scammer disguised as a prophet. During these years of barrenness, the couple grew financially and was very wealthy. But even with their wealth, they could not conceive a child. They had tried several IVF and even surrogacy, which failed. As a matter of fact, various medical practitioners had used the couples for various tests and trials procedures, all which proved abortive. After all of their efforts at conceiving a child failed, they resigned and concluded that probably it was the will of God for them to be barren. However, to their greatest dismay, surprise and joy, on the 30th year of their marriage, the couple conceived a child. It was a thing of joy, not only for the couple, but also for the family members, friends, and well-wishers who had journeyed with them all through their years of barrenness, providing succor and consolation, and also various means of ending their barrenness. As the pregnancy grew, so the joy of the couple grew. They went to the hospital for scanning and discovered that they were to conceive a twins. At last, their joy were full. They were going to be parents, not only to a kid, but to 2 kids. What a blessing from heaven. On the 3rd month of the pregnancy, the couple went for another scan to see the state of their pregnancy. This time, the result took a different turn. It moved from a feeling of deep joy to deep sorrow and pain for the couples. They discovered that their babies were growing out of the womb, a medical condition popularly known as ectopic pregnancy. And in order to preserve the life of the mother, there would need to be a surgery to take out the fetus so that the life of the mother could be saved. This automatically meant the death of the fetus. It was a big blow and a regrettable and very sorrowful event for the couple. They had waited for several years, numbering up to 30, just to conceive a child. And now that they have conceived one, they had to lose their babies in order to save the life of Mrs. Clinton. The event was so heartbreaking that Mrs. Clinton fell into depression and contemplated suicide several times, one which she would have carried if not for the consoling words and encouragement from her husband, and most especially her mother, who had always been with her all this while. She was so bitter that most times she accused God for being unfair to her and also hating her so much that he could not bless her with the fruit of the womb. Little did she know that the cause of her barrenness was the bargain her mother took when she was very little. When they were very little, they had nothing and lived in abject poverty. Their father, Pa Chidi, who was a blacksmith, had died 2 years after Mrs. Clinton was born, so she never really knew her father. Her mother then was a petty trader who sold pepper at Utazi market to support her father in taking care of the house. They were 5 children altogether, and Mrs. Clinton was the last of the children. When her father died, things became very difficult for their mother. The pepper she sold at the market was no longer enough to cater for the 5 kids. It was a tug of war to make ends meet. When Mrs. Clinton was 3, she became terribly ill that her mother took her to a native doctor to help heal her child. The condition the native doctor gave Mrs. Clinton's mother was that they would have to sacrifice the unborn children of Mrs. Clinton, who was then 3 years old, in place of her life. And after the sacrifice was done, she would not only regain her health, but she would become the source of wealth for the family. However, when she grew up, she would be unable to bear a child. This request was a tough one for her mother. She went home, deciding not to abide to the request of the native doctor. But as the health of Mrs. Clinton, then as the child started to deteriorate, that she was at the point of death, her mother had to give in to the request of the native doctor who casted a spell on the young Mrs. Clinton, and she was restored to health. The native doctor also assured the mother that the young Mrs. Clinton would not only be restored to health, bring riches to their home and lift them from their poverty. Much to the surprise of the mother, things began to change, as foretold by the native doctor. A white man visited the village and took interest in sponsoring Mrs. Clinton in her education. He also did much to improve the standard of living of the family. He built a new house for them in the village and opened a big store for Mrs. Clinton's mother so that she can cater for the other kids. Mrs. Clinton, on the other hand, grew up to become a very intelligent woman. All through her education, she was always outstanding. She had the best results in the common entrance examination into secondary school. She continued in this feat, winning prizes and emerging top in various competitions for her school. She was indeed a jewel, not only for her school, but also for her community where she came from. She became a source of pride, not only to her mother and siblings, but also to the entire family members. Her outstanding performance did not go unnoticed, as she was awarded a scholarship to study medicine at the prestigious Oxford University for emerging overall best student at the West African examination, popularly known as WAEC, an examination written at the end of high school program in order to gain admission into college. At Oxford, she met Mr. Clinton, a dashing, handsome and well-mannered young man. He was also studying medicine. They connected and the love blossomed. Shortly after their studies, they got married, and for over 30 years, they could not conceive a child. And when they finally did, they had to do away with the fetus so as to preserve the life of Mrs. Clinton, because the pregnancy was an ectopic pregnancy. Her mother, who could not bear the sorrow she was in, could not hold it any longer and had to reveal to her the bargain she had with a native doctor when Mrs. Clinton was a child to save her life. The revelation was a shocking one to Mrs. Clinton. She could not believe that all this while, her mother knew of the source of her barrenness, but did not say anything, allowing her to go helter-skelter, moving from place to place in search of the fruit of the womb. She was so bitter and angry at her mother that she almost cursed the day she bore her. Her mother, also tearful, apologized very deeply to Mrs. Clinton and informed her of a man of God whom she had been hearing about and whom she feels can help break the spell of Mrs. Clinton so that she can conceive a child. At first, Mrs. Clinton was reluctant because she has visited various so-called men of God, many who had duped her of her money with the promise of having a child, all yielding no results. But after much persuasion from her husband and the bitter tears of her mother, who was determined to remedy the situation, she gave in and visited the man of God. Watch out for the part 2.